We need at our table of awareness the logician, but equally we need the intuitive, we need the mystic.
I almost died. I was allowed to go to the very precipice of death, of life and death, and look over the edge. And I was allowed to behold what was there and allowed to come back. Most people aren't.
When we talk about being aligned with ourself or being aligned with our soul or hearing our higher self, that's really what we're talking about, is being connected to that divine part of ourself, that light-filled part of us that is connected to God energy, that is connected to everybody here and every experience we've ever had.
If more doctors, more professionals can open up to use intuitive gifts in their work, that's really important.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, mediumship, near-death experiences, consciousness, and what it all means. How do you accept the unthinkable when the unthinkable happens? Everything was going right in the delivery room until it wasn't for Jody Gelb. It was her first child, and she was so excited to have a new baby daughter. And then her world came crashing down. Her new memoir, She May Be Lying Down, but She May Be Very Happy, is a beautiful story of Jody's journey with her daughter and how she coped with not only the tragedy of her life and how she had to adapt to what was unexpected, but also how she prepared for her death. Today's episode is so moving. It touched me in such deep ways, and I really want you to listen all the way through the end. There's a crazy coincidence that happened with Jody and I, and it was really fun to share a mutual connection as well. And I just so appreciated the depth and the real intensity and emotion of what this interview and this book, frankly, brought up for me. And I know that in listening, you will feel it too. With that, here's today's episode with Jody Gelb. Welcome, Jody, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thanks so much. It's really nice to meet you and to be here.
So we talked a little bit before we got started, but you have this beautiful micro memoir, as it's called. She may be lying down, but she may be very happy. And this is the story really about the unthinkable, when the unthinkable happens. That's sort of, you mentioned that in the book, and that's kind of how I thought about it. Can you tell us what happened?
Let's see. The short-ish version is I was very excited to be pregnant because I waited a long time, and I thought, I had to start my career in the theater, and of course I had to meet my husband first. And so I was about 38 and pregnant and having a wonderful pregnancy. Although emotionally, there were some very bad problems that I had been through with my husband, but this was going to be the brand new, wonderful beginning, having our daughter, because we knew she was going to be a baby girl, and went into labor naturally and went to the hospital, and the doctor suggested sort of speeding everything up, as they tend to want to use, Pitocin to move the labor along, and on you go. And in the next, 4 hours, at a certain point, something went very wrong, and they had to get Louisa out with, I think it was forceps at the time. And during that time, her brain did not get enough oxygen. Mm-hmm. She was, we didn't know it at the time. We knew it was it was terrifying. They quickly had to intubate her and take her away to the neonatal intensive care unit. So we were left alone in a room, and my husband and I, we were terrified. We didn't know what had happened. And that's how her life started, with this terrifying birth. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know at that time anything except that was terrifying. We saw her at 3 a.m. in the little isolette. She was a beautiful 7-pound, 11-ounce baby. And something had happened, and we hoped that it was a blip. And luckily, everybody came out of the woodwork and said, don't worry, our baby had a really scary birth, or our baby had seizures when she was born, and everything's fine. This stuff happens, which was very lucky, because then you have hope that that's just a terrifying thing happened, and it's going to be okay, because you couldn't imagine anything else. So that's how Louisa came into the world.
But your experience was different than everybody else's. Than everybody else who it was nothing. It was a blip. Yours was not a blip.
Well, yeah, they kept her in the hospital about 11 or 12 days. And I wasn't in shock, but you're in a kind of shock where you don't want to ask too many questions, because I didn't want to ask, because I was terrified. And we brought her home about 10 days later. We moved in because my parents were closer to the hospital than our apartment in New York. And we never left for about 9 months, I think, my parents. And over the next months, little by little, it became clear that something was very, very wrong. She started to have seizures again, a kind of very scary seizure that is called infantile spasms. You can have different reasons for having them. She probably had them. Now we know probably that it was because of the brain damage during her birth, but some babies just develop them because of other brain anomalies. And so little by little, over many months, it's clear she's not developing physically. She's not doing any of her milestones. And within about 3 months, we were told about a program through New York Hospital, a different hospital that has what's called early intervention, which is it's a fantastic program they have in New York State. And she was getting, physical therapy and occupational therapy, but all these kinds of things to help her, quote, catch up. So at that point, I could still think, oh, well, they're talking about catching up. Catching up means, you'll be okay. You're just a little behind because something happened. So, it was me and going into bookstores a lot and looking for books that had to do with babies and brains. And little by little, it was clear that damage had occurred, and this kind of damage doesn't go away. It's a what do they call it? A one-time insult to the brain, and it doesn't progress. And there are all these effects, such as movement disorder, not being able to do all the normal movements that a baby should make and then a child should make. And so little by little, you just start walking on a path that you never imagined. And
do you? Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Do you feel like the doctors knew what had happened, or do you think people really thought like she could recover from this?
I don't know if I could go back and ask them. I have a feeling. I mean, what happens is, as soon as the baby's born, they do the APGAR scores. And it was, 0. And then maybe 5 minutes later, it was 2 or 3. I bet doctors could have said, you know what? Some babies have these APGAR scores and they're fine. Some babies don't. So I bet you would get a mix. But I'm also, I'm sure some doctors would have immediately thought, this looks not good. And luckily nobody told me any terrible thing before I was, nobody ever just said, this is the situation. She is very brain damaged and they're going to have all of these problems. I think I let the message out by saying to doctors sometimes, we'd get an MRI, let's say. At a certain point, she needed an MRI of her brain. And when I went to talk to that doctor in my memory, and memory is tricky, I know, but I have this memory of saying to him only this question, which was, can she be all right? Can she be okay? And I think I'm wondering if certain doctors would hear what the parent was saying and realize, okay, they might not want to know every single detail. So he said, yeah, she can be okay.
Mm.
And that really got me through a period where I just can't even imagine if someone early on, and it does happen to some parents, early on, a doctor will say something so devastating. And you are, I mean, it's like you're never ready to hear it, but like you're really not ready at that point. I was really lucky because nobody did that to us and just said something really bad. They would say things along the way like, oh, she's having infantile spasms. That's not good. But they wouldn't then say, you know, infantile spasms can mean that the child is going to be very, very brain damaged. They didn't. They would just sort of say, just in the moment, well, we're dealing with this. And here's what you can try for that, this treatment.
So that keeping hope alive for you was really important.
Really important to get through those early months. Because, I mean, that's just because of me. I mean, other parents maybe could have faced it very quickly. I don't know, but I am a little overly sensitive, I think, with certain things. And I kind of found my own way, which was I would go to the Barnes and Noble in the neighborhood of my parents, and I would look up books, and I'd see something and close it and leave and feel devastated because of something I had read in a book. But I luckily didn't have a doctor sit down and say, you really need to face facts. You know, your child will never, you know, one of those conversations. And I remember a mom telling me that did happen to them. One of the doctors did that, and her husband, you know, never got over it. It was pretty horrific. So yeah,
And
keeping hope alive was really important for me. Yeah.
What did Louisa's life look like then? And what did your life look like?
Well, miraculously along the way, at some point you have all this hope, like, well, okay, maybe she'll have a little limp, you know, and then you remember, oh yeah, that little boy had cerebral palsy. He used to walk to school the same time I did, and I'd see him crossing Madison Avenue, and he had this funny way of walking because his, you know, had spasticity in his hips, and you think, oh, okay, I can deal with that. And then you'd think about Daniel Day-Lewis and my left foot and the serious disability he had, and you think, okay, I can, you know.
So that bargaining.
Yeah, just thinking, I can do that. Yes. And somewhere along the line, you realize, I did, little by little, I gave it all up. I finally was like, no, that's not going to happen. And it's weird to think, how did that happen? Where little by little, you finally get to a place where none of that's going to happen. There's going to be no walking. There will be no sitting. She will not be able to hold her head up unless she's got neck support. Finally, like the worst thing in my head was that she wouldn't be able to talk. But at some point, you got to a point of acceptance where you thought, okay, like a friend once said, oh, does Louisa talk? Because he hadn't seen us in a long time. I said, no, she can't. And he said, oh, okay, that's okay. He didn't dramatize it. Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. No, it was just, oh, okay. And that's why, you know, the way I named the book, I had all these different titles. And at some point, I came up with this title, which was from this very clear memory that I have of being at my parents', having Louisa on this very high double bed that used to be my childhood bed. She had therapy, and the therapist, you know, had her, and she was kind of moving her, and Louisa's lying on her back because she couldn't sit up and couldn't roll and all of that. And then she had left, and I was talking to my husband, saying, you know, is she always going to be lying down? Like that's unthinkable. And he very calmly said, in his beautiful Polish accent, she may be lying down, but she may be very happy,
Mm.
which to me blew me away. I think it's in some way where that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So little by little, we got to that place of, yeah, she can't do any of these things you couldn't have imagined. And she's happy. She's a happy child. She connects to people. She's right there. She looks right at you. She finally got a yes and a no that was very clear for us, how she would turn her head to the right and make a kind of a I for yes. And the no was just almost a little head shake, or there's something with her eyes. It was very clear. So you get to this place, if you're lucky and your child is happy, where you go, we're okay. We're fine. She's happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge figuring out the complications that do come from having spasticity and dystonia. And then you get into having orthopedic issues, and nobody tells you that, thank God, when they're little. That's all really hard to deal with, but you find your way if you're lucky. And if you're lucky, you have loving family around you. We had these therapists coming that made us feel, that normalized everything. It's like, well, look at her.
They saw it, right?
Yeah,
they
she's
see
great.
that. So it doesn't feel so out of the ordinary for them.
Yeah. And being around people those are the kids they work with. And, so just this feeling of, oh yeah, she's happy. And you just change your world into a place of, I'm fine if she's happy today. And that's where eventually, you get, if you're lucky, because, as my husband said many years ago, he said, to me, she's completely normal because she had understandable emotions, things she wanted to hear us say or tell her stories about, or movies she wanted to watch, or going back to Disneyland and riding the Matterhorn or whatever it was. She loved life. And so she got us through in a way because she had this joie de vivre, I think. And that was huge.
It sounds like you were, and as you're talking, I'm just thinking about one of the questions that I was going to ask, but then I think about with babies, it's like, how did you know what she needed, right? But with babies, they can't speak. And as a mother, your intuition grows and you just know what your kid needs. They don't need to say what they need. You can look at their face, even as they grow up with words, and and so what did your connection look like over the years as she grew and your relationship grew? Did you get it yet? I bet you're wondering what it is. It's my new Discover Your Essence toolkit, which you can get by signing up on my website. It is a free toolkit to help you tap into your essence. I talk a lot about essence on the show, in my course. So many people talk about purpose. Forget about purpose. We're done thinking about purpose. And what we want to think about is, what is the essence of who you are and why you are here, and how you can live from that place. So if you want to get my free essence guide, go to my website, dramyrobbins.com.
We just figured out the way to communicate with her. The best way was just talk to her, ask her questions, and she will let you know with either doing her yes or doing her no, or laughing or crying. And so that's how we did it. And we found, really through parents, we would find special schools that were perfect for her. And so she was going to school. That was the normal thing. And then at a certain point, we found out about this school out here that Neil Young's wife, Peggy Young, had started with another parent who also had a kid with very severe disabilities, because Neil and Peggy have a son named Ben, and Ben was born probably I'm guessing in the mid-'80s. They looked around, they thought, I don't know how these kids like this are going to go to school. So they started this school. So it was a mix of Louisa telling us by her yes and her no, and a lot of questions that we would ask her, what she wanted, what would make her happy, what she wanted to watch, what music she wanted to hear, and then miraculously finding these schools that were designed for kids with severe disabilities and were about teaching whatever that kid could learn. Letters, reading, whatever it was, they would figure it out. So we were very lucky with, maybe that's a synchronicity too, which is you'd meet somebody and the next thing you know, you're finding out about a whole other method of how to work with kids with these kinds of disabilities. So there was always a lot of luck involved for us.
So how did she learn? Like, how did she communicate with you?
You know, at the Bridge School, they're very big on trying, well, they do whatever's going to work for the kids. So some of the kids are able to access a little computer where you either touch the screen or you tap something with your head that connects to a word. So I think we tried that for a long time, but the easiest thing was you just talk to her. Talk to her and ask her, do you want this? Is this what's bothering you? Is this the story you want to hear? You know, you go through all these different questions. Or I would go to what I call the W questions. Is it a W question? Is it why, where, who? And it was like that. You would ask, you'd get a yes or a no, and you would keep going until, you know, you figured out, oh, she wants to hear this story. But in terms of her telling a story, that was really not possible. I mean, she could access that computer for a while, but it was so slow that
and it has to be so frustrating.
Just talk to her, yeah.
For her, I would imagine. I mean, it sounds like she knew everything that was going on. She just couldn't.
Yeah, and then she learned her letters. I mean, she learned her letters through probably, Sesame Street and also Bridge School. So then you also could say, okay, you go through the alphabet when you were trying to figure out what is it she's trying to either say or what does she want us, what subject does she want to talk about that she has a question about, and you just go through the letters. And when you hit the right letter, she would make a big turn to the right and say her I, and then you knew that was the letter, and then you'd go from there. So it could be very slow,
right?
But usually we were able to figure things out in terms of what it was that she was trying to express. And a lot of times it was, what did she want us, like stories she wanted us to tell again and again.
So you went on to have another child after having her. You had another daughter who was born healthy, no birth trauma issues.
Exactly, almost exactly to the day 2 years later. Yeah.
How were you able to do that? How were you able to kind of step into that after?
My husband and I feel like we were really lucky because we knew that what had happened to Louisa was not anything genetic. It was not mysterious. It was a very clear birth trauma. And so we thought that, that's not going to happen again. So we didn't have fear about having Dora. Everyone in the family was terrified when we were getting close to the due date. They were terrified, and we were not. They were like, you should schedule a C-section. You should do it. And I just felt like it's going to be fine. We're going to have no drugs, no Pitocin. We're just going to have a normal, healthy birth. So I was lucky. I didn't have any fear. And when we realized that probably halfway through, Dora was going to be, it was going to be a girl, everything seemed perfect. I mean, was sure I was going to have a little boy. And then when we were told it was a girl, oh no, that's perfect. She's going to have a sister, and she's going to be a big sister to this little girl. And we were really lucky because we did not have fear. And then you're totally in the moment because of going through the birth. You're not even thinking about what had happened because you're just in excruciating pain.
Nothing can get you more present than birthing a child.
Exactly. So we were lucky. And I mean, she was practically born in a taxi. But I got into the hospital in time. I had unfortunately, a second obstetrician that just not pleasant, but he didn't have to do much because I was in the pushing stage when I arrived, and she came out 10 minutes later, as soon as they put me on that birthing bed. It was timed, and she came right out. So we were very, very happy and lucky. Yeah.
Now, in the book, you talk about this, but it sounds like you spent a lot of time preparing for the end of Louisa's life. Did you have a sense that was, or did doctors say it's likely going to be a shorter life than a longer life?
No.
Or
See, luckily, nobody said that until later, but I just started doing a lot of research because I guess at a certain point, I just thought, wait a second, how is this going to go? And then one day, taking her to school, and it was probably 2001. We moved here in 2000. Maybe about a year later, a family that we were close to, all of a sudden, that little girl had been in school one day, and 2.5 days later, she was very gravely ill and dying with an aspiration pneumonia. Because a lot of these kids have little aspirations because their swallowing is not coordinated because of low tone and all of that. And so that little girl died very quickly. And that was probably when I really thought, oh, okay. Louisa's in a very vulnerable category. I knew she was vulnerable, but I guess not. It really hit hard when that happened. That was a very, very sad and scary thing. And then a bunch of other kids in that tiny school, this happened to them. They died in the middle of the night. They died, the morning they were going to go see a doctor because they're very, very vulnerable. And this whole thing with lungs is so, that tended to be the thing that would get a lot of these kids with severe special needs. They have very vulnerable lungs because of all the swallowing issues. So, I did lots of doctor appointments and made sure that everything was always, we were on top of all of that. And so at a certain point I knew, oh, okay, I see, this is where we're going to go. Louisa's not going to have a long life. And I will read everything I can to, quote, prepare myself. I don't know. I had to do a lot of worrying and Googling about kids with these kinds of disabilities. I read about life expectancy. I had to know what was coming and, when it might, not when it would happen, but really be in reality about that situation. So.
And did you feel, it sounds, can you ever feel prepared?
No. There's a beautiful book. There's a book that got me through years. It's a book by a woman who had a child with, I think, Down syndrome. And it's called Changed by a Child. And each page, it's a little book. Each page is a reading. So it starts with a quote, and then she writes something, and it ends with a quote. So they're just short little readings, and it's all of the different things that parents go through with a kid with special needs. Everything from dealing with school districts to death and everything in between. And there's this incredible page, which I remember reading many times, which is about this issue, which is, you're never going to be ready. You're trying to, that it's coming. You try to preparing yourself, but she writes this beautiful metaphor about when it's spring, you're imagining winter, but you can't until it hits and you're brought low. And that's what happens is you are preparing yourself. And then, of course, you can't prepare yourself But what was helpful for me was knowing not only, death was coming, but when it comes, if it happens in the hospital, well, then what happens? So I would talk to the chaplain and say, okay, if Louisa dies in a hospital, please tell me what happens. How do you get the child from the room to the next place?
Mm-hmm.
If it happens at home, I was reading books about, natural death. So I would know exactly what would be done, where it happened. And this is the way my mind apparently works and needed to work. So that when it did happen, there was no thing of, oh, what do we do? It was just, okay, don't call anybody. Everybody's fine where they are, and that you can have her in the home for a day. And there were no, for some reason, I needed to know all of those particulars. And I read a lot of books around those subjects.
Well, and I think it's actually, as you're talking and as I was reading it, I think it's so important. We don't talk about enough about death in life. That's part of why I do this podcast. But I also think like knowing those processes and reading about how you dealt with her death and what you were able to do was really special. I mean, it sounds weird to say, but it felt really special and really sacred.
Yep.
And death used to be done in the home.
Exactly.
And then it moved into the hospital.
Yeah, the hospital. And then, or calling the undertakers immediately. Like, it's just a body now. Well, no. We used to take care of.
It used to be sacred.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us what happened with her and how you beautifully stepped into honoring her in her death.
Looking back, I know I have guilt about this probably. Of course I do. I thought I could do a 6-month tour of Wicked because every 2 to 3 weeks, you have 3 days off. The tour was all in the West. So I knew that I'd come home for 3 days in between each city. And we just said, absolutely do it. It's just 6 months. It's going to be great. And so I was away. I'd been away maybe 2 weeks. And Louisa was sick. I had talked to her on Skype or whatever it was that we used back then.
How old was she? When was this?
16 and a half. And my husband had talked to the doctors. They said, don't bring her into the emergency room. She's too vulnerable. There are too many sick kids right now. She's going to see both of her doctors in the morning. So we had a plan. I talked to him about that. And the next morning, anyway, that was when it all happened. And I was in Costa Mesa in Southern California. I was going to be driving that day to the next city, which I think was Fresno. And I called my stage manager because stage managers, what they do is they keep these shows running and they organize everything and deal with sick people and putting in understudies. They're incredible what they do. He came right over. He said, don't worry about anything. He helped me pack up my room. He took my car. He dropped me at the airport. I was home in, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours. And I had told my husband, we don't have to do anything right now. We'll just have Louisa where she is, which was on her bed. And then we moved her downstairs to the room, which was a much cooler room. My parents were flying out as soon as they heard the news. And my best friend came over. Louisa had always loved prayers for whatever reason. My other daughter, Dora, had been in an Episcopal day school, so I called the minister there, and he came over. He probably thought we were maybe a little cracked because, usually people call the undertaker immediately. But we did prayers around Louisa. He left, and we moved Louisa to the little downstairs room. My parents arrived. My best friend called the funeral parlor that's a 5-minute walk away. They said, "You're great. Everything's fine. Just keep her where she is, and we'll come over tomorrow morning." And so she went to our little local funeral parlor, and somehow we talked to them and said, we want to have visitation with her every day for the next, let's say, 3 days. So I guess what they do is you are in let's call it a cold room. And then at 3:00 or whatever the time was that we picked, we would go over there. It was right over here, right from my house. We'd go into this particular room, and we would be with her for an hour. And some of our helpers, because we had a lot of people helping us with Louisa by this point. So they were able to come if they wanted to and see Louisa. And, we had time to go through what you said is sacred time. We were very lucky to be able to do that. And it was a wonderful little place that they said, absolutely, you can do that. And then you plan, what is the day that we're going to go to the cremation cemetery up in Colma? And we just had the time to do all of those things that were very important to me and I think to everybody. Because nothing
Do
was
you
rushed.
feel like that helped you in your grieving process to be able to really you talked in the book about how usually you call and then the paramedics show up with the sirens and it's like the whole block knows, and not that they probably didn't, but it has as you were telling it when we got on earlier, I said, thank God I'm composed enough to speak with you, because I was reading it before we got on and was very, very moved by the story. But just allowing that space before kind of everything sets in, before, people start showing up and you have a funeral and, whatever your religious practice is. And then it feels like you're in this whirlwind.
Yeah.
And the train doesn't feel like it's stopping. And here you literally stopped the train and you were like, let's do this in our time.
Yep. It felt, I just use that word, like you said, it's sacred time. And to have that time and I can't imagine anything different. And the whole thing was, you said the fire engines. We unfortunately had to go through that because, you call your local town and you say, my daughter has died. She was very special needs, very, very fragile, medically fragile. But they said, sorry, we've got to call 911. So 911 had to show up. I don't blame anybody. It's just bureaucracy, I guess.
Right.
So we had to go through this because they had to get a doctor on the phone who would explain to them that this was very normal, that this child had died in the middle of the night. But you're in a state of, you're in a weird state.
Yeah.
So, it's like, oh my
everything
God,
is.
I can't believe this, but it'll go. And then my parents arrived. And within about 2 days, my mother was gravely ill with pneumonia. And she was taken away by 911. I don't know. I can't remember.
Oh my
Let's
gosh.
say 3 days later, they carried her out of my house.
Oh my gosh.
And my father was
trauma.
Being like cuckoo because it's too, we all have crazy stories about family.
But too much, too close,
So luckily we had that time at this little funeral parlor in our neighborhood in Burlingame because that was quiet And that's our little family. And then these beautiful women that had helped us over the years with Louisa, who wanted to come and pay their respects as well, because that was something they did in their culture. I know some people, oh, you don't want to see a body, but for them, no, they wanted to be there.
Well, in a lot of cultures, they have a reverence for death that we don't have here.
Yeah. And they have ritual. Like, I don't have a strict religion, or at least I certainly didn't at that point. So I've always been, trying to find, how can I deal with that? And I kind of figured it out for us. And, the Jews, well, there are many cultures, but I'm half Jewish, but not brought up in that tradition. And I did read a lot about Jewish death rituals, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very Orthodox, but it's amazing because it's very ritualized. And I think it helps everybody because this is what we do. And then we sit Shiva, and then the burial society prepares the body in a very reverent, beautiful way. I'm fascinated with all that. I've been reading about death. Don't ask me why. Years before I even had Louisa. Probably because I went, I'm a dramatic type, and I went into theater. I've been drawn to probably drama and the drama of being alive and dying and all of that.
Yeah. And I always say this, I think I just said this, I'm trying to think of who I was recording with just like last week, that I'm Jewish, but we do rituals quite well, all rituals from birth to death. Yeah. There really is like we know how to do it. It's always done the same way. It's predictable. Even if you're not Orthodox, there's still a predictability to and a ritual around like marking days and times where in other religions, they don't do that as much. And I think it does provide a real container for people to hold them in that space and to know, every year and this time of year, you're going to get a letter from your synagogue saying, do you want your loved one's name read? And you get a candle in the mail to light for their yortzeit. And there's just really beautiful rituals around it that say, like, not only do you acknowledge that this has happened, but we as a community acknowledge that this has happened to you.
I know. I have a friend I went to college with her. She's on Facebook. That's how we're still connected. Every year on the anniversary of my mother's death, she has it. She must keep all these records. She will always have my mother's name, her dates, and may her memory be a blessing. She's Jewish. So I know that is, I'm very attracted to ritual and finding out about what rituals people have.
I think we all need that. We all need ritual. And we've gotten, again, far away from ritual as we've gotten more individualistic and industrialized. We've gotten away from that. And it does provide so much comfort in everything. Yeah. So, Jody, what are some of or have you seen or experienced, this is always the part my listeners love, synchronicities and signs from Louisa since she's died?
The most wonderful things that have happened, I would say, are I rarely ever dream about her. And after she died, it was many, 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 many months. And I had never dreamed about her. And I was traveling, I was on the road driving back from New Mexico. I spent the night in Arizona. It was her birthday, which is October 2nd. And in the middle of the night, on her birthday, I had my first dream about her. It was so vivid. She was in the arms of this wonderful man that I had done the recent Wicked tour with. And she loved handsome men. She was always flirting. If there was handsome male nurse, she was happy as could be at 2 a.m. in the emergency room. So I think the dream was this wonderful guy holding Louisa, and she was so happy and smiling. And I think I laughed and told him, oh, she loves handsome men. And I woke up so happy. I didn't wake up sad, like, oh, I dreamt of my, like, I woke up as if I had been with her. I had the joy of having been with her. And I would say those are the things that have been so magical, is the times that I dream about her. It's like I'm with her, and I do not wake up sad, like, oh, I'm not with her. She's gone. I just have this sense of I got to be with her. That was so joyful.
Mm-hmm.
So those have been my most magical experiences, I would say, the times, and they're not that many, but the times that I've dreamed about her and I've been with her, it feels like I'm really with her. And for some reason, I don't wake up sad. I wake up very, very happy. Like I had this magical experience. Incredible.
Yeah.
So.
And any other interesting synchronicities or signs that have shown up?
Well, the other thing, we had this amazing woman, Jill, who helped us with Louisa the last couple of years. She'd come in the day, she'd help us, she'd pick her up from school, and she was just this amazing woman from Northern England. And she, for some reason, called Louisa Birdie. And so, I don't know, in the last 5 years or so, we have had hummingbirds end up in the house. From one time it was through these open French doors. Obviously, always there was a door open at some point, and you would find a hummingbird buzzing away because they were trapped. And it's happened at least 4 or 5 times. So of course you think, I love that. I mean, something about hummingbirds and her nickname, and something beautiful and magical about that.
Well, Jody, if people are interested in your story or learning more about you or connecting with you, where can they go ahead and find you? And then before people log off, I have a funny story I want to share.
Hopefully, yeah.
So just go ahead and tell, if people are they're like, oh, we've heard enough. Wait 1 second. Go ahead and tell them where they can find you.
Probably, I know there's an author website, so it's just really simple. It's just my name, Jody Gelb, JodyGelb.com. And that has, I know, some things about the book and things that people have read and written about the book. And I know you can contact me through that website. I'm also on Instagram and of course Facebook. My other daughter asked me to close make my Instagram private, because she is now a rising singer-songwriter, and she doesn't want people going to all the old family photographs. So it is closed, but please connect with me and I will, connect with you. But yeah, that's been a great adventure, Dora. Her name is Dora Jar, and she is touring.
Oh, wow.
The band, yeah.
Okay.
She's just been opening for somebody named Gracie Abrams, who I think got famous because of opening for Taylor Swift. So,
oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah. Okay. So everybody go listen and follow Dora, because Dora Jar. Can't follow you.
Yep. Find Dora Jar.
And I just want to share with everybody a super fun story that Jody and this is how small the world is.
This is unbelievable.
So Jody toured with Wicked. And I had no idea when you toured or like the years. I don't even know what year we're in at this point, frankly. I think I lost track about 5 years ago, at the beginning of COVID. And I said to her, you don't happen to know my hairdresser who was the Wicked touring. He did all the hair and makeup for Wicked. And sure enough, Jody knew him. And I just texted him and he did respond. So Robert, shout out if you're going to listen to this episode, which you probably won't because you've not listened to any of my episodes, but maybe he'll listen to this one. Wrote back, oh my God, Jody Gelb, one of the most wonderful women I have had the pleasure to work with.
That's so sweet. We were very lucky that I got to work with him because he is So talented.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Jody, thank you so much for your time and for sharing this beautiful story of your daughter and your path to a life living in what was unthinkable. So thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.